Hello, and thank you all for joining us today. I am Grace. I'm the Global Chief Growth Officer at Imagination, and welcome to our latest event, The Power of Fandom, leveraging experiences for authentic fan engagement. Really exciting. Today, we're going to be unveiling our headline results from our research across 2,000 fans, both in the UK and in the US. To give you some more context, we asked these consumers how they feel about the increasing commercialization of sports and whether they think their interests are coming second to those of the bottom line. We wanted to find out what they think about the role of brands in their favorite sports, and did they enhance the experience, or are they simply annoying and a distraction? Some really interesting insights to come. Just before we kick off, bit of housekeeping. You'll see on the right, there's a chat window. Please feel free to chat along with the speakers. And if you have any questions, we'd also love to hear from you there. Next to the chat, you'll see questions. If you could pop those in there, that'd be great. And also, very unfortunately, Kirsten Kamlowski, our panelist from JP Morgan Chase, had technical issues, so won't be able to make it today. So, without further ado, let's get going. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to Jennifer Grace. She's the Communications Account Director in Imagination Detroit, who'll be hosting our esteemed panel. Over to you.
Thanks, Grace. I'm really excited to introduce you to our panelist. Stu Gower, Senior Manager, Brand Marketing Sports at Adidas. Josh Smith, Senior Marketing Manager, North Division Sports at PepsiCo, and Jury Burris, Executive Creative Director at Imagination New York. Hi, all. As Grace mentioned, we've recently undertaken some research to better understand sports fans and how they engage with brand and brand experiences. Thank you so much for joining today. With that, let's dive into our panel discussion. Being a fan is all about participating community. It's about the power of tribe, and your research clearly supported this, showing that experiences help make sports even better. We found that a huge 93% of people said that they're likely to remember and cherish their experiences from a live sporting event. So to kick the discussion off, I wanted to ask our panelists a few questions. I'd like to start with how have you guys seen sports fans evolve, behavior change, or evolve over the past couple of years?
I'm happy to take that kick off.
Yeah, would you take that one first?
Sure. So I'll say this, like, we come from a place of privilege at Pepsi, where Pepsi being, part of that food and beverage experience is pretty natural, right, fit into the live sporting event space. But what we've seen, right, is people building additional experience around the live sporting event. So again, things like tailgating before, right, a football game within the NFL. That used to be a big part of the experience. That's even bigger, right? We're seeing a lot more foot traffic at stadiums, even for those who don't hold tickets.
Sure.
And so for us, it's about understanding how those behaviors have changed and how we can be, more authentic and kind of elevate that experience both in the stadium and around the stadium for game day.
Thank you for that. Stu, what have you seen?
I would say, well, firstly, I'd say we're very similar in terms of how many partners we have in the space, and like the authenticity to Adidas and being synonymous with sports and live action. I think a key part for us is really transporting that match day feel or game day feel or event feel through our channels to consumers around the world. I think when we look at a lot of the work that we do that sits within that space, we use a lot of our digital infrastructure as well to really like transport that emotion and feeling outside of what you would experience in stadiums. I think that's really important for us to sort of build and maintain, I guess, audiences, and make sure that we're transporting that to people to really feel the excitement that sits within that space, and then bringing them closer to Adidas and making it feel sort of one ecosystem, really.
Wonderful. It's so interesting, guys. So moving on slightly, we also asked fans if they think sports are becoming increasingly commercialized. on a scale of 1 to 10, they returned on an average of 8. So 1 being not at all commercialized. Jury, do you agree with this? You're on mute.
Sorry, good start there. I think there's I guess a difference in markets, right? So in Europe, sports clubs have always been founded on community, and so I think that there's probably a really high sentiment. Whereas in the US, there's I think more of a greater acknowledgement that sport is really an entertainment product. So it really sort of it goes to show that it depends on the market, but certainly, sports have never been more relevant. I think fans have never been more passionate, and so it's only natural that brands want to play a role in that. So yeah, absolutely, there's a lot of branded activity taking place in sports, and I guess there it just means that brands are having to work harder to really cut through and to create more meaningful experiences for those fans. Otherwise, it just becomes incredibly noisy, and it's easier for them to switch off and focus on the main product, which is the sporting event.
Yeah, for sure. Appreciate that. So Josh, curious, what about you? Do you think sports are becoming too commercialized?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I think to your point about how commercialized they are versus are they too commercialized, right, are kind of separate questions. And I think, we're all acknowledging, to your point, Jerry, that sports are very commercialized. I think how brands approach that is whether or not fans do that positively or negatively. And I think that's the challenge that we all face is when we choose to participate and be a part of that fan experience, are we doing that in a way that at a minimum feels authentic and really should be, again, like improving that fan experience in some way? And so I think if that balance is there, then I don't think sports are inherently too commercialized. But I think we can all think through examples where more of the pay to play, inauthentic way of brands partnering within sports can dilute the fan experience, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, it's all about the balance for sure. Stu, I'd like to come to you for a second. What do you think the positives and negatives of this are?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Josh there. I think in terms of the conversation around the commercialization of sports, I think for Adidas, it's really important that we stick to our line, which is all about through sport, we have the power to change lives. And I think that should be at the core of any of the commercial work that we do, if that makes sense, and looking at community building and making sure that we're increasing access and participation within that space. So it's not just about marketing and activating around certain sporting events or with communities and clubs and things like that. I think it's making sure that you have a positive effect on the space in which you're working in. And then when it comes to the negative side of it, I think just on the basis of globalization of sport now, you see different sports being moved into different markets, money coming from different places. And I think whether we have more scrutiny in terms of where that money's coming from, how is that changing the game, and the purpose behind the messaging and the stories there, I think there might be conversations around how that should be regulated and what that looks like. I think that's not something that necessarily would be from an Adidas standpoint. I think that's more of a personal situation. And you look at sort of gambling within sports and how integral that is in terms of the finances that come into the game there, but then also some of the effects that it can have on people. So I think it's a really interesting question in terms of the money that comes into to sport based on the size of the industry now. And it's a hundreds of billions of dollars industry, right? So we're going to consistently see more people wanting to get involved. And I think the reason people do get involved is because sport offers a raw emotion and inspiration that you won't get from many other places, that allows you to connect with human beings and people from all walks of life. And that's super special, but it also means that you're going to consistently get interest from brands from everywhere, really, in terms of wanting to have a way into it and access to those stories, really.
Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate your insight. Guys, let's move on just a bit here. So the next findings from our research showed that 81% of respondents said they're likely to favor a brand that creates experiences for fans versus ones that doesn't. So this got us thinking about the relationship between reach, really, and engagement. It definitely seems that gone are the days of slapping a logo around a stadium and it being enough. I mean, I think we've all clearly established that just already in this conversation. It's clear that fans want more from brands, right? They expect activating against sponsorship deals has never been more important. So, Stu, what brands have you seen activate their sponsorships really well?
Yeah, I think even when we look at reach and engagement, I think it's the reach part is interesting. It's like, who are you trying to reach again and why? And I think the why is super important. So there's a couple that I typically use as like really nice references. I think, and Josh will have heard me say this before, but Corona did an amazing piece on native sportscasters in Mexico to make sure that they were sort of being able to communicate with indigenous people within that country, and the way in which they brought commentary to the World Cup to people who are in those areas and communities is like an amazing way of making sport more accessible on the biggest moment in what would be the sporting calendar in a World Cup. So I love that as an example, and how that's sort of improving and supporting communities. I think Arsenal do it really well from a club perspective. I know a couple of years ago they did something where they moved like Little Islington to all around the world in terms of building Arsenal communities in whether it be America or Asia or different countries and spaces like that. So that's also one that I really, really like. And then I think the third one, I think the power of the athlete now is so big, and you look at the way in which people are trying to reach fan groups is really interesting, and how people will follow an athlete around the world. And obviously Leo Messi's just come into MLS, but you look at the work that Apple are doing there and how they're using and partnering with Leo in terms of building their season pass access, and people tuning in to see him and what he's able to achieve on the pitch and bring to the America is amazing, really. So they're three very different, I think, ways of looking at partnerships and working within that space, but I think really, really nice. But yeah, my favorite is always the Corona one. I think the way that you can use a brand's power to open up access and community is super important.
Nice examples. Josh, what about you?
Yeah, so I lived in Seattle for a year most recently, and one of the brand activations and partnerships that I was absolutely so impressed by was Delta with the Seattle Seahawks. And at kind of first glance, I wasn't quite sure when I first walked into the stadium kind of how that fit. And I think to your point about reach, they have the signage, right? They're showing up on TV games as well through their signage. There's a lot of ways they kind of reinforce that from a reach perspective. But from a depth perspective, one thing that was kind of news to me as someone who had lived there is Boeing, the aircraft manufacturer, was actually founded in Seattle. And Delta has one of the largest Boeing 757 fleets in the world. And so there's this interesting kind of authentic connection that they played off of to create a really great partnership and bring the fans along in that experience. So within the stadium, they have an entire concourse that's the Delta club level, and they use all these great milestones as you wrap around the stadium of Delta kind of aviation history, along with milestones when they used Boeing aircraft. And so it's a great way to kind of celebrate that pride, involve people in a different way than might be kind of normally assumed on game day. And then they also integrated on-field performance with the Delta Sky Miles program. So every passing yard, right, flight, kind of that underlying tie there, equals one Delta Sky Miles award. And so it's only open to Washington State residents. And it's a great way to kind of bring that game day experience into other parts of consumers' lives, especially as we think about right post-pandemic. People are traveling for the first time in meaningful ways to see friends, family, vacations that they had to give up for 2 to 3 years. And so as people do that kind of excitement and experience ties right back to the game day activation that they have and on-field performance. And so that's, to me, again, back to like authenticity and elevation of the experience. Like that was just a perfect example of things that are kind of unrelated, right? Delta's headquartered down in Atlanta, Boeing and Seattle Seahawks, that tie in from Seattle, catty corner points of the US, but still feeling, real to the fans. So really impressed by that work.
Thank you so much. Both really nice examples, and clearly the common theme here is authenticity. Just moving on to Jury, though. Jury, tell us, how do you think brands balance depth and reach when it comes to sports sponsorships?
Well, I think sort of as these guys, Stu and Josh have mentioned, I think authenticity is absolutely key, right? And I think for a brand, to turn up and meaningfully execute at a sporting event is absolutely crucial. And I think you have to focus on the fan and on the consumer. But from a cost perspective, that can be really high, right? The more premium the experience, you know, your cost per user becomes very, very high. So I think it's really important that a brand can utilize that experience effectively as a content platform to make sure that the content that is generated out of that, both through influencers as well as fans and potentially some sort of PR or media component, you know, are a way of spreading that cost and balancing out the sort of way in which you maximize the event or the experience. So we've always really thought about how do we create something that's really deep and meaningful for those in that space or in the environment. So it is incredibly noisy. There are always lots of brands, especially when you go to some of these larger activations like the World Cup. Everyone's coming in with a really big game idea and they want to capture the attention of the fans that are turning up. So you really have to stand out, and that means you have to be either, you know, provide access like nobody else or provide somebody with a really premium experience. But then ultimately make sure that, yeah, there's a great content and media planning component to the idea so that you are reaching a much broader group. And I think that content in itself becomes a lot more authentic as well, because if the fans are engaging with it, then that's more relevant to those that are consuming it online. So yeah, I think that's really, really important in the kind of broader marketing mix.
Well, that's a perfect segue. So for all of you, that doesn't have to be a free for all here, but does anyone, and Stu, maybe we start with you, but does anyone have any examples where you've seen engagement in your own campaigns align with this? So i.e. higher engagement from campaigns that allow fans to participate, experience something.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the probably big learnings I think we're getting as we're sort of gearing up to look at World Cup 26 and the diversity of America and the US and how that's sort of developing. I think a year or so ago, we worked on really trying to understand the demographics that sit within LA and then the two different teams, LAFC and LA Galaxy, and ultimately the diversity of cultures that sits within South Bay and LA and other areas too, because I think once you get to understand or you get to involve people who sit within those communities and you start storytelling with them, there's a real authenticity there. But what it helps actually do also is, to your point, is it drives engagement because you're speaking to the community authentically. And I know I've sort of said the same thing there, but it's going sort of full circle, I think. And what we found actually in the content that we created, to Jerry's point, was that the views in terms of how that ran weren't as high as what we would typically benchmark, but the engagement was really, really strong. And then on our city handles, the views are actually like super high and outperformed it by like 60%. So if you look at those facets that come together, what we're really saying there is true to almost exactly what Jerry's saying. In terms of example, is when you really do involve the community and bring them into the stories that you're willing to tell and you want to tell, but you have to do that really authentically, right, and make sure there's consistency in those relationships and building those out. And I think that's something that we've really taken away with importance. And when we look around the different cities and host cities that are coming in World Cup 2026, like getting a real understanding of the communities and culture which makes those cities is really, really important. And it's not something you could just dive in and say this city is X and this city is Y. It's really being part of that community and storytelling with them.
Thank you so much for that. Josh, is there any examples you'd like to include?
Sure. I think some of this ties back a little bit to what Jerry was saying in terms of cutting through the noise, providing experiences. Like, how are you doing something to position yourself to best win with the fans and win with consumers? And so on the Pepsi side, right, it's all about, for us, across our portfolio of beverages, right? Because it's not just Pepsi, it's our new brand Starry for lemon lime, it's Mountain Dew. It's picking specific aspects of the fan experience that we want to focus on. And when we pick out something that's unique, it's a lot easier for us to cut through the noise and kind of quote unquote own that part of the experience. So for Pepsi, because it's part of the food and beverage experience, it's already built into sports. It's about how do we get fans closer to the game? They're already in that moment. How do we make them feel like they're even more part of that live experience? And so that can be things like hospitality assets where we're providing tickets, upgrading their seats, on-field passes, It might be, as part of that signed memorabilia, right? There's ways for us, or, maybe someone hasn't ever been to a game, right? How can we get them to a game, right? There's a lot of people who love sports that can't attend live sports for different reasons. And so bringing in something like that and providing consumers a chance, or at least the opportunity to participate in sweepstakes or other activations that get them closer to the game, we find a lot of, engagement with that type of work. And when we do that, right, we have a lot of national work we do for Pepsi around football. But when we focus on that engagement and drilling down a little bit more to each individual team and the local fan experience, right, to Stu's point about being authentic and localized, we actually see sales performance on average improving in those cities over markets where we're not plugged into the teams directly with sponsorships. And so we do have to get it right. It takes a lot of focus. And to Jerry's point, right, those more premium experiences cost money. But you're already paying for the sponsorships, right? And so finding that balance of investing in the reach, but investing in the depth is super critical.
Thank you so much. That's incredibly insightful. In fact, as we move ahead, I want to dig into that a bit more. Before we do, though, there's another stat that stood out for me. 83% of fans are likely to continue engagement with a brand after they've participated in a fan experience at a sports event. Jury, in your experience, do you see a correlation between sports activations and an increased loyalty or even sales?
Sure. I think maybe Stu mentioned earlier, but I think it sort of comes back to, is that sporting experience, or is that sort of brand experience relevant to the sport, right? Like you have to make that connection. And I think it's easier for some sports. Like Adidas has an absolute role to play within football. And so that connection between Adidas and soccer or football is totally, makes a lot of sense. Whereas it's potentially more difficult for, say, I don't know, an IT brand or, a company that isn't directly associated with that sport. But as long as the experience is authentic and relevant, and whatever fans turn up and experience enhances their experience in some way. So as Josh mentioned, it might be access, or it might be, an opportunity for them to get closer to the team or see what it's like to feel, to be a sports star or whatever it is. Then obviously that association and that affinity, that passion that they have for the sporting team that they support does carry over to the brand. I think that, it's just a positive sentiment that they have and they remember and might influence them when they go on to, purchase something kind of way beyond. So yeah, I think it's definitely connected. But it means that the brand has to work very, very hard and make sure that when it does turn up, it is totally relevant to that moment in time for that particular fan.
Thank you. Absolutely. Gentlemen, you have sort of touched on it as well, but let's come back to it. And so I'll put the question to both of you. Have you seen a direct correlation between activations and loyalty, or even the Holy Grail, the sales?
Yeah, I don't mind taking this, I guess, first, since Josh has done his first share first. I would say yes. I would say we're fortunate enough to work with sort of a big digital infrastructure team as well, and have membership platforms. So like when you come into Adidas as well, you get a lot of the, I would almost say, similar experiences that Pepsi would provide in terms of access, things to sign memorabilia, to get taken to games, offers improved and stuff like that. And I think that's a really nice way for us to almost offer things that money can't buy to a certain extent. And I think that's something that once you're able to give that experience has to be good, obviously. It can't be something that falls short or whatever. But I think that's a really nice way of building relationships with like long-term consumers, if we want to use that word, or an audience. I also think in terms of working more with communities, I think I've probably harped on about this the whole time, but I think being able to bring people into Adidas and make it feel like a family is really important. I think you want people to understand that the values of an organization and what they're wearing. I think now more than ever, people really care about a logo or a brand that they're wearing, whether it's on their clothes, on their feet, whatever, whether they're drinking something. I think the company's values is really important to that. And I think that's also great that you get that feedback from an audience in the world as well, right? I think it's super important that people are held accountable and challenged on views and ways of working and things that have been said. So I think we definitely see a continual growth in terms of being closer to a consumer and an audience. And I think that the more open that you can be with or externally with people is only going to improve that.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And do also appreciate the sense of community there as well. Josh, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I think they both hit on it, really well. The only thing I'll add is kind of the flip side of it, which is it takes a really long time, right, to build these associations, to build up the loyalty with fans and have that, transfer to the consumer side of the equation. But we've also found that can be eroded very quickly, right? So it's not just about what you're doing today; it's what you've been doing for the last number of years, and it's about what you're going to do tomorrow. And so, right, we're always planning on, the success for today, absolutely, but at a minimum 12 months out, right? How are we going to continue to reinforce this and continue to get that success? Hopefully, to your point, trickling through to retail and sales. So yeah, but I 100% agree on all the points that Jerry and Stu had.
Thank you. So it feels like we've built a pretty strong business case for connection between fandom and experiences. I'm keen to hear what you all think the future holds for marketing and experiential teams to best build these types of connections with brands. Jerry, I'll come to you first.
Good question. I think I'd probably say there are three things that are really interesting. I think new types of consumption. So, we've sort of not maximized, but a stadium only holds a certain amount of people, right? And so I think there's a whole new future in the way people consume sporting content, be that short form, be that across alternate channels. I think, the NFL alternate broadcast recently where all of the players were, tracked and then turned into animations and broadcast through, I think it was Nickelodeon, is again really fascinating, right? Like loads of sports and brands are experimenting with ways of consuming sporting content. I think secondly, new sporting products. A lot of organizations are spinning off and creating new sporting products that are more nimble, more orientated to festival environments or social style content. MLB Home Run Derby X, which we recently worked on with Major League Baseball, is a good example of that, where we created a short form version of baseball. We toured that around the world. It was on a main stage in a festival site, not in a traditional ballpark, and the majority of our content came through TikTok, but then we also had 20,000 people turn up. That was very different to your sort of traditional sort of baseball game, and that allows both the brand and the rights holder to really collaborate and experiment and to try new things. And then finally, I just think it's more integrated as well. So these guys have mentioned things like access and relevance, and I think the more relevant brands are within the sporting context, I think the more interesting that'll be and the more engaging it'll be for fans and consumers at sporting events.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. Josh, anything you'd like to add, or Stu, either of you?
Just a quick one. I agree with all of that. I think the only thing I'll add on there, and sorry, Stu, if I steal anything you're about to say, because it kind of ties together what you talked about earlier, is also, right, a sense of giving back, right, and responsibility. And I think we've all seen that trajectory that, right, it's not enough to be present anymore. You have to be relevant. On top of that, you have to elevate the fan experience. I think that's kind of where we're at moving forward. But it's also, what are you doing to give back to those communities in some way, right? So if for us, Starry, the new online basketball is our platform from a sports perspective, right? What are we doing to elevate the sport and those who play the sport at all levels, right? Not just the NBA and WNBA. And so I think that's kind of the area where we're really trying to work through today. And I think a lot of brands are trying to do that. But that's kind of where I see fans increasing their expectations moving forward.
Yeah, I can completely understand and appreciate that. Stu, do you feel like Jerry and Josh have covered it? Did he steal what you were going to say?
I guess to a point. I think the other thing for me I think is going to happen in sports more generally is I think local, more community sports is going to get higher investments and be more important and draw more attention. I think when you look at the globalization and the size of the NBA, the NFL, the Premier League, the Champions League, I think because these organizations are getting so big, they're going to struggle to really resonate. And that's why I think college football is a really interesting case study in America and how passionate people are about the game that sits within those cities. And I think Wrexham's a great example. Obviously, they've had like Ryan Reynolds and Ryan McElhenney as well, who are in that space and have sort of given that glow for the football club. But if you look at what that's done for the community and how it's turned like different athletes and players within that space to sort of become like national and international stars. So like Wrexham obviously now tour in the US, but what it's actually doing as well for that community is massive. And I think it's a really interesting case study for what we might see more of. And it won't all be on that scale and of operation of what they're actually trying to do. But I think you will see more local and community teams become more, I wouldn't say more important, but have more investment and greater visibility within local cities. And that's particularly probably relevant across the US. I think if you look at St. Louis from a MLS perspective, I think they had 10,000 fans at a reserve game a week ago. Now that's sort of incredible numbers, right? But it just shows how important that football club has become to that community in St. Louis. So I think you will see more of that, and those will be built out.
Sure. Incredible indeed. So moving on just a bit, and I want to pose this question to all of you. It's a two-part question. How do you guys think we'll see the relationship between rights holders and brands change? I mean, what do both parties need to do to enable deeper, more connected experiences with the fans? Who wants to jump in on that one first? Shall I nominate? Josh, why don't you jump in on that one?
Sure. So I think what's interesting about this, right, is there's obviously an incentive on the rights holder side, right, to create new ways of monetizing those properties, right? So there's a lot of kind of incremental assets, kind of new streams of media, right, ways to try to sell those to brands to plug in. And I think historically we've seen brands on average really try to take advantage of that, right? It's more is better. And I think what we need to find a better balance is being more discerning, more intentional on both sides. New ways to engage new opportunities for assets is not a bad thing inherently, but how are we making sure that as we engage on those that they're again relevant, and it's not just another way to pay to play for that term, right? And I think that's going to be a challenge. But at the end of the day, if we can kind of come together and focus on again the fan experience, because if we're improving that, if we're elevating the game day experience and how that translates at home and store, everyone wins. So it's better for fans, it's better for rights holders, and it's better for brands. So that's the kind of piece that I'm working through with my partners today and moving forward.
Amazing. Stu, love to hear from you on that as well.
Yeah, I would probably echo a lot of what Josh said there. I think the big thing for us, and I think what's Adidas's core, is sport and people playing sport. So ultimately, with all rights holders, I think they're probably looking at different purposes for partnership, right? But from an Adidas perspective, I think it's really about sort of building people into sport and continuing sport and its growth. I think we're now in a world where sort of gaming and social and everything that sits sort of in that virtual world is probably taking people away from the amount of time they're sort of participating in sports at all levels and at all ages. And I think I haven't got all the numbers off the top of my head, but there's so much research that shows you the importance of sports for not just like personal health, but also like career benefits and networking and everything that sits within that space. And I think something that I'm super passionate about as just a core individual is that, and it's getting people to play sport. And I think whether you look at a lot of the partnerships that we work with, if we're working with, say, football clubs, we'll also work with them from like a running perspective and take people and give them a running experience in and around like local communities and partnerships and stuff. And we just try and think about how we can utilize sports in all vehicles through the partnerships that we have. And I think that's really important for Adidas. And ultimately, like, we need sport to consistently be like growing and existing, right? For Adidas to be an integral part. But I think for us, it's that, and it's making sure that there's a real community focus and a people focus really in terms of that sort of main tagline in terms of changing lives and making sure that we're there to improve and inspire people.
Thank you so much. Jury, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. I think maybe the only thing I would add is, or sort of build on, is this idea of collaboration, where previously, rights holders are notorious for not really ever wanting to pay for things, right? Like their content is their product and they allow the brands to sort of activate on their behalf a lot of the time. Whereas now, I think more than ever, it's important for them to be able to have some sort of control over the experience, the authenticity of their brand as well. And so I think more and more, it'll almost be a co-invested experience where rights holders will now spend a bit more time and energy into thinking about how they collaborate with brands to bring those experiences to life, to make sure they're more authentic, to make sure there's co-control over what it is that gets developed. And I think, as rights holders themselves, they are now competing with many, many other experience brands, right? Sports is growing more popular than ever, but it's also becoming more and more congested. There are many more sports out there, many other entertainment properties, all in competition. So I think having that control and having that true collaboration with brands will only keep the sports themselves getting stronger and sort of building on the success they've had in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, guys, this has been a really engaging, insightful conversation today. Delightful, really. I guess some really strong points of views and ideas on how brands can connect even more closely with sports fans. Probably goes without saying, authenticity and community have come up as common themes throughout our discussion today, and really kind of sit at the core of all of it. Stu, Josh, Jiri, thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate your time. I'll now hand it back over to Grace, who will introduce you our final fireside chat.
Thanks, Jennifer, and to all of our panelists. Really interesting conversation. Now, I'm really excited about this next bit. I'd like to introduce Patrick. He is a leading behavioural scientist who has been featured on the BBC, on The Guardian, The Economist, and in the Sunday Times, as well as a public speaker and author of Hooked, a book that explores the science behind persuasive messages for marketers. So let's dive in and uncover a bit with him. Hi, Patrick.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good. So let's dive in. That panel was great. And as discussed, lots of themes and messages coming out of that. But one of the ones that really resonated with me is that being a fan is all about participating in this idea of community. We talked a lot about community just then, and this power of the tribe. What is it? Tell me, in all of your research, what is it about humans that makes us so drawn to people with similar outlooks?
Well, to a certain extent, there's an evolutionary advantage to it. So we tend to like people who are closer to us socially. And that can be demographics, but also it can be interests, background, attitudes, beliefs, these kinds of things, because there's safety in a tribe, in a group. It also gives you a sense of purpose and belonging. And these are things which we know from quite famous work like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that we need to feel like we belong to a group. It's quite important for our well-being. And there's a theory or a model in psychology called social identity theory. Essentially, it holds that the reason we develop identities, especially being part of a group, is because it gives us self-esteem. It gives us a feeling of being kind of in the right and able to do things. When you're part of a collective, you have more power, really. You can do things together, and it's quite an intoxicating feeling sometimes. And so really it comes down to two things. In psychology, we like to be right and we like to be liked. So we like to feel like we're part of a group. We have that belonging and relationships. We don't like to be left out of the group. Again, evolutionarily, that could be quite dangerous. And we also like to be right. So we don't really like having our worldview or beliefs challenged. There's brain imaging research showing it can actually be quite scary and threatening. So we like to surround ourselves with people who see the world in the same way that we do, more or less.
Really interesting. And how does that relate to, well, you've just touched on it, but this behavior as part of a group. So how do the people change and adapt their behaviors?
Well, as I said, it improves self-esteem. So there's a good aspect to it. It also makes you feel good. There is also kind of an in-group bias where you might jokingly taunt Everton fans if you're a Liverpool fan, that kind of thing. But also you like people more who are part of your tribe, your group.
Yeah.
So there's more of you're more likely to be influenced by them, to listen to them. So there's a liking bias that happens as well.
Yeah, which must, I suppose, be linked back to this idea of it being sort of integral to our identity, I guess, being part of these tribes.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the stats that I loved was that 61% of the respondents see being a fan of a sport or a team as an integral part of their identity, what we just touched on. Is there some sort of psychology behind that? So this idea of identity?
So there is the need for fulfillment of self-esteem, as I said, but there are also several motivations which are probably driving being part of kind of a sports or fan identity. So there's belonging, having relationships, getting to know people, having things in common, having conversation starters, things you can talk about with other people. There's also a sense of vicarious achievement. So you feel good when your team or your favorite player wins. You kind of win through them. You transport yourself onto the pitch as well. And that feels good. And again, it gives you a feeling of self-esteem. There's also excitement and thrill. It just feels good to feel emotions, basically, and to maybe distract yourself from a bad day as well by seeing something that's exciting and entertaining. And also there's an appreciation of skill. If you see a player that's really good at what they do or a team that's performing really well, then that is satisfying to watch.
And so how would I change, or would I adapt my identity to sort of align with a group, do you think, if I'm part of this community or this tribe?
I think there is some research on that, yes, that once you start to commit yourself to a group, then you behave in a way that's consistent with that. So there was one study, interestingly, where they had people take a test about how environmentally conscious they were, and they kind of rigged it so everyone was told, oh, you seem like a very environmentally conscious person, no matter what answers they gave. And because they were bestowed with that identity, they went on actually to do more recycling and so on. So yeah, once you assume a certain identity, it then has a cascade effect on your behaviors.
Got it. And so the big question for us is, I suppose, how all of these elements of the idea of tribe and community and the fan identity, coming from the attitude of a marketer, and this kind of idea of the power of experiences. The research showed that fans are much more engaged and have a more positive takeout and time when they're involved in an experience attached to one of these kind of moments in sports or fandom. Is there something about that physical participation that makes us more susceptible to things or messages, or, you know, as a marketer, I suppose?
Yeah, absolutely. In advertising in particular, it's called co-creation. So if you can get people to engage with the message and kind of come up with an answer themselves, it will be stickier, it will stick and be more memorable and persuasive. So if I wanted you to remember the number 4 later, it would be more effective for me to ask you, what is 2 + 2? Because then you'd come up with the answer yourself and it would kind of stick in your memory. So this is largely what advertising does. It creates puzzles for people to solve by being a bit weird or different, or presenting a metaphor that people kind of have to decode. And in decoding it, they come up with the message. So ultimately, the more engaged you are with an experience, the stickier it is. Very basic example, there's research showing that if you present something visually and audibly, whatever the word is. So through audio and visuals, people remember it better than if you just see it or if you just hear it. So the more kind of channels you can engage people through, the more senses, the better. And of course, the ultimate of that is this physical interaction. So actually interacting with something just makes it much stickier.
I see. And I suppose linking that back to what you were saying at the beginning about we're already in our community, we're already in our tribe and feeling our identity. And so a physical experience on that just sets to build on top.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. The top 3 reasons for attending a live sport event were to experience the thrill and excitement of sports, that was 56%, to support their favorite team or athlete, that was 56%, and to enjoy the atmosphere and entertainment, that was 54%. Where does this highly emotional connection come from? Where is this passion and sort of high emotion drive coming from?
Well, there are a few things. I mean, as we talked about earlier, there are these motivations which draw people in and are emotionally engaging, like vicariously identifying with the team. So when a player seems to be excited, you also, through your mirror neurons, feel that excitement and suspense. There's also a curiosity and tension as you don't know what's going to happen next and what the score will be. And there's also this appreciation, again, of skill and talent, which can be quite thrilling to observe. But for live sport specifically, it's a bit of a very light and positive form of brainwashing. So I wrote a book recently about brainwashing, and throughout history, these anthropological rituals or rites all have kind of things in common: drums and chanting, being part of a group, things like that. Wearing a certain uniform. And so when you go to a live sports event, it's quite similar. You're part of the crowd, there's this music and chanting and so on, and it kind of switches off your critical brain in a way. It's a bit of a hypnotic trance, and that allows the emotional self, the kind of more primitive self, to come through. So I think that's partly also why live events that you attend in person in particular can be quite intoxicating.
I suppose, and that would be my next question, is do we seek them out? Is that why we consistently go to big sports events, big music events, big day out?
Yeah, they're quite cathartic. It allows you to kind of switch off your brain a bit and just be emotional and let go and uninhibited. But there's also this interesting theory called risk homeostasis, which holds that we have a certain appetite for risk. And if we don't have it filled in our lives, we go and look for it. So this is why, if someone's bored at home, they might watch EastEnders because they want to feel that excitement and that drama. It might be why billionaires go base jumping and parachuting, because they're looking for that risk in their otherwise very safe and comfortable lives. So yes, we do go out looking for these emotional experiences. And also they can be pleasurable. We can get good emotions from them. They can be fun. And they can also be distracting. If you're stressed or bored or something, it's quite nice to have something that entertains you, that takes your mind off things.
Yeah. My dad would say that being a Luton supporter has got quite high risk, I would imagine, as well. You sort of touched on that, particularly the emotional impact that they have, but is there a physical element as well? Is our blood pressure changing? What's happening internally?
Yeah, so it can get your heart rate up, your sweat pores opening, you can get goosebumps, things like that. But it's all really about emotional kind of energy, a physiological response, which can be thrilling. It can feel good. There was a study where they had a couple interacting on a bridge or not. So basically a scary situation or not. And they found that during the scary situation, their heart rate was up, but their conscious brains reinterpreted that as being attracted to the other person. Having that sense of thrill and excitement can be interpreted by the brain in different ways. And so it may lead to a sort of bonding with the other people that you're with.
Like a dopamine.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it makes you feel more alive. I think there's also a kind of cathartic release of stress, which is good. If you've had a bad week, then it's great to be able to go to an event and shout and chant and jeer. And of course, there's a feeling of bonding. And finally, emotions really are what we remember in life. We don't define our life by calendar days, but by weddings, football matches, birthdays, really fun nights out, whatever it might be. These emotional peaks what we remember in life. And so that's why these kind of live events are so important, because they're memorable and they contribute to our stories that we tell about our lives.
Amazing. I think my sort of final question, without doubt, you have summarized the sort of emotional, physiological power of fandom, which is why we're all here, and that link back to community and tribe and why we're all so attracted to it. And again, I go back to the idea that as marketers, it's so important for us to go into this authentically. And we talked about it a lot in the panel just then. There is an awareness that we are increasingly commercializing sports. And do you think that there's a risk, therefore? How do we mitigate? Like, what is that risk of brands arriving in that space or spending time in that space and being seen to be inauthentic?
Yeah, it's fine to be commercial and to advertise and have sponsorships and so on, but it has to be authentic. It has to fit. And there's a case study from esports, slightly different, but it was Coca-Cola made this advert for gamers, and it was a game where, or it was an advert, sorry, where people were competitively playing this video game, and then one of the competitors paused the game to have a drink of Coca-Cola, and then all of the characters in the game put their weapons down and held hands and had world peace. And the general population, I did some research on this, the general population thought it was okay, it was a nice advert, kind of funny. Gamers hated it because they found it was very inauthentic, largely because when you're playing competitive gaming, the whole point is to be competitive, and you don't want the players to put their weapons down. So it just didn't fit. And so when you need to be commercial and have sponsorships, there needs to be a fit in this kind of triangle of the audience, the fans, the sport or the team, and the brand. They all need to fit together. If not, then people can push back.
And so what does pushback look like? What is that? If a consumer did see through that, we've already established that they're very powerful. These groups of fans, they're in a sort of community, tribal sort of mentality, heightened emotions. And if what's the backlash? What happens? What if they see through it? Can it really rankle a fan?
Yeah, absolutely. People don't like to feel like they're being manipulated. So if they sense that there's something inauthentic, then their defenses go up. They activate what's called persuasion knowledge, and they see what kind of tricks the advert is using. And ultimately, the result is that it won't work. They'll just reject the message. They'll argue with it in their heads, and they won't form positive associations with the brand. And then on the extreme, depending on how much you've upset the community, you could have negative word of mouth and boycotts and so on. But I think that's quite rare. It's mostly that they just won't listen to the advert.
Yeah, right. So more of a neutral response, I suppose.
Yeah.
Oh, Patrick, that was fascinating. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time and your insight and bringing that side of things to this discussion.
Thank you very much.
And thanks again to all of our panelists, and thank you for joining us today. We hope that you all really enjoyed the session as much as we did, and we, Imagination, will be in touch with the insights and further results into our research following this event. Thank you.